Hi folks, welcome back. Thank you for watching. Please do hit subscribe if you haven't done so yet. It really does help when you do that. So today folks, we're going to be taking a look at strings, and specifically the similarities and differences between two different types of string construction. Now, as some of you might know, these have been my strings of choice for the past few years. These are Newtone strings, handmade here in the UK. They sound brilliant and last forever. But my favourite thing about these is you can choose your own bespoke string gauge. So you can get incredibly nerdy over the exact gauge of your D string to suit your bending preferences. You can get very carried away with it, but they sound wonderful, and these are the only strings I use nowadays. Now, I was emailing the folks at Newtone a few weeks ago, and they said, would you like to try a couple of sets of round core strings? Now, I'll be honest, until now I've never really paid any attention to the construction style of the strings I use, but these are essentially what most guitar strings are nowadays, which is hex-core construction. But back in the day, and a few companies still make these now, primarily for bass guitar, but some for 6-string too, you can get round core strings. So what's the difference? Well, when it comes to the top three strings, the E, B and G, there's no difference at all. But when you get to the round strings, essentially what the names refer to is the shape of the wire that the sort of windings are wrapped around. So with hex core, the wire in the middle is hexagonal in shape, whereas with round core, it's completely cylindrical. Now, I've read a lot of things on forums over the years about what the differences are, and some people say that round core strings give true vintage tone in the way that hex core don't, and all the sort of forum myth. So today what I'm going to do is put that to the test. So I've got two sets of the round core strings, and I've just put some brand new hex core strings on my 330 and on my Strat. So I'm now going to play a few things on these two guitars, then swap the strings to the round core strings and play the same things with the same settings, and put it all side by side to see what the differences are between hex core and round core in terms of sonics and in terms of feel. So this should be a really interesting video, folks. I'm genuinely excited about what the results are going to be today, because this isn't something I've ever really looked into. So without further ado, guys, here we go. we are, folks. Now, please do comment underneath, let me know your thoughts on everything you heard today. I love chatting nerdy guitar stuff with you folks in the comments sections. Now, there's several different ways we can compare these two types of string construction. In terms of longevity, I don't honestly know yet because I've only just put these round cores on. I will update you in one of my end of month Q&A videos as to whether these stay fresher and snappier for longer than the hex cores do, but it's too early to say on that front for me. Now, in terms of sonics, hopefully as you heard, there is very little difference between the two. There are some differences, but they are very subtle at best. Now, to my ears, the hex core strings had a slightly more snappy attack to them. They were a little bit more kind of on the edge of the plectrum in terms of their bite. And to me, the round core strings seem to have a little bit more low end to them. But that isn't something you couldn't adjust for with the EQ on your amp. If you took the hex core strings, knocked the treble down slightly and the bass up slightly, I think you could get the two sets sounding 98% the same. So sonically, there is very, very little in it. And I certainly don't think that round core strings are the only way to true vintage tone, as some forums would have you believe. I think any differences are so subtle they could be accounted for through playing style alone, let alone the type of guitar you're using, amp you're using, speakers you're using, all that sort of stuff. Now, the final thing is the feel, and this is something you're just going to have to take my word on. Some of you might have real-world experience of the differences between the two, so please do comment underneath, let me know whether you agree with me or you fiercely disagree. But there was a definite difference in feel between the two different types of construction. And I don't think this is actually what is happening, but it feels like the round core strings have less tension in them. They feel a bit more kind of elastic under the fingers. And it's almost like you've gone down a string gauge or you've dropped the whole guitar down to E flat. They just feel a little bit more slinky. And doing bends like I was doing at the end there, that sort of thing, that sort of bend definitely feels easier with the round core strings. They just feel a little bit more slinky under the fingers. But again, you could just drop a string gauge and use hex cores. So it's nothing you can't compensate for elsewhere, but there was definitely a difference in feel between the two, and that was by far and away the most apparent thing to me here in the room. Now, there is one more thing to note about these round cores. If you are stringing a Gibson style guitar, you can just pop the string through the tuner and wind them on like you would any other string. But with Fender type tuners, quite often you have to cut the string first before you poke it down the middle of the tuner to wind it on. Now, with a hex core string, the angles on the corner of that internal wire hold the winding in place. So you can just snip the string, pop it in and wind it on. But with the round core strings, if you snip the string before it's under tension, then the winding will kind of slip on the string and the string will go completely dead or just sound thuddy like an elastic band. So what you need to do when you're stringing a Fender type guitar with round core strings is kink the string first before snipping it and putting it down in the hole, and that way the winding is held in place and the string sounds great. So it's just something to get used to. Fortunately, I knew about that and I didn't fall foul of it today, but I have heard people online talking about they've bought some round core strings, snipped them, and they just sound completely dull and thuddy. That's why. It's because there are no angles on that internal wire to hold the winding in place. So that's just something to be aware of if you're going to explore round core strings. But I would definitely encourage you to experiment. If you have a string manufacturer who will offer you both, buy your gauge in both types of construction and just see which you prefer. They are subtle differences, but that's what this channel is all about. So thank you ever so much for watching, folks. I hope this video was interesting and useful for you and dispelled a few forum myths. Please do carry on subscribing. I know I always say it, but it does make a huge difference when you hit subscribe. And I will see you next time. Bye bye.